just when you thought the Paramount saga was over, it gets a whole new wrinkle. So Edgar Bronfman Jr. Has finally, because originally he had signaled that he was considering an offer, and I think I had talked about it in a previous story. Edgar Bronfman Jr. has finally made an offer for Paramount Global. This offer was initially valued at $4.3 billion, and then, like, literally just a day or two after the offer was made, he sweetened the deal to $6 billion. So he added about $1.7 billion. So it's not just him; he's the primary, actor in this offer, but he is kind of leading a bidding group, which also includes a strange hodgepodge of people. So it also includes Stephen Paul, who's a filmmaker who created the film Baby Geniuses. Also includes John Martin, who is the former CFO of Time Warner. Includes Brock Pierce, who's a former child actor and is now a big player in the crypto space. This also includes Nurali Aliyev, who is a Kazakh businessman and the grandson of the former president of Kazakhstan. And also includes John Miller, who's a partner at ding 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 Sherry Redstone, who's the owner of National Amusements, which owns Paramount. John Miller is a partner at Sherry Redstone's Advanced Capital investment firm. So what are the details of this offer? So it would include a $2.4 billion payout to Sherry Redstone. It would include a $1.5 billion amount to pay down some of the debt. It would include the $400 million breakup fee with Skydance, right? And that additional $1.7 billion that he added later on could be offered to Class B shareholders for $16 a share. So notably, that's higher than the $15 per share that Skydance was offering for Class B shareholders. But it would not take out other Paramount shareholders, right? So the Skydance deal apportioned $4.5 billion to buy out all of the Class A shareholders and a chunk of Class B shareholders. Notably, this would not involve a complicated two-step acquisition the way Skydance would. The idea they would just acquire National Amusements from Sherry Redstone and then indirectly now control Paramount. And Bronfman, in a letter to Charles Phillips, who heads Paramount's merger and acquisition committee, in his letter to Phillips, Bronfman said, quote, "Our proposal eliminates the risks, uncertainties, and costs of combining Paramount with Skydance. We believe Paramount is most valuable as a standalone business," end quote. So again, I'm not going to belabor this. The context for all of this, Paramount has been up for sale for like almost a year now. And Skydance Media, run by David Ellison, son of, tech mogul Larry Ellison, Skydance seemed like the most likely eventual buyer or suitor, if you will, right? It's what Redstone wanted the most, because she would get disproportionately benefit from the deal, which made a lot of shareholders unhappy, again, with that disproportionate payout that she would get. And multiple suitors have come and gone. There was Sony at one time, Byron Allen, the list goes on and on. Paramount Skydance ultimately, and what I thought was finally the freaking end of the story, Paramount Skydance finally settled on a deal in July, which part of the deal included a provision. It allowed Paramount a 45-day, quote-unquote, go shop period to allow for new potential bids, right? The idea being is that it would kind of shield Sherry Redstone from any legal retribution from unhappy shareholders, saying, like, look, we opened the floor to other better offers and nothing came along. And God forbid, but it seems like God is forbidding, God forbid Paramount reneged on the Skydance deal and went with a different deal. The provision, stipulated that Paramount would then owe Skydance a $400 million breakup fee. So again, they had this 45-day go shop period, and this new offer came in literally like right before the deadline. I think the deadline was like last week. So who is Edgar Bronfman Jr.? So he's a former CEO. He's the former CEO of Warner Music Group. He's currently the executive chairman of Fubo TV, the sports streaming service. He's heir to the Seagram fortune, which is like a Canadian beverages company. I think it started out in whiskey, but I think it's moved on to so many different kinds of tasty beverages. Notably, he's friendly with the Redstone family. Again, I feel like a lot of rich people kind of just run in the same circles. And the New York Times note, because also they're both heirs, right? Sherry Redstone did not build the Paramount empire. Her father, Sumner Redstone, did. Similarly, Bronfman is the heir to a big fortune, so they kind of have that. And in a lot of ways, David Ellison is too. This is a story of rich billionaire kids, essentially, all arguing over who gets the toy. And the New York Times notes that if his bid were to be successful, Bronfman is seeking to run the company as the CEO. And upon this offer, Paramount, because they could have just said, we're not going to take this seriously. We don't think it's going to be a good deal. Paramount officially extended the go shop window. So obviously they're taking the offer seriously. Now the window is extended to September 5th. The committee the special committee for Paramount that's reviewing all these offers and deals put out a statement saying, quote, there can be no assurance this process will result in a superior proposal. The company does not intend to disclose further developments unless and until it determines such disclosure is appropriate or is otherwise required, end quote. So ultimately they're like, put a pin in this, don't ask us about it, we gotta look at this thing. But they have to, they couldn't just go, we're not going to take this seriously. They have to evaluate this offer, right? Because, again, it's such a good deal and fairly comparable to the Skydance deal. Again, they could face legal trouble if they were to just ignore this wholesale. Because, again, it's just too good of a deal. So what does Bronfman want with Paramount? Well, why is he doing this? So, again, he would want to be the CEO, but Variety notes, rather when I say what does he want with Paramount, more so like what would he do with it? Variety notes that he may consider selling certain divisions, like CBS or like MTV and Nickelodeon, things like that. The LA Times notes that this bidding group believes it can save up to $3 billion in costs, as opposed to Skydance. They only estimated $2 billion in costs, and they would do this by boosting streaming profits, employing AI in business functions, and quote unquote right-sizing the bloated corporate structure. Right sizing just means finding the optimal size for the corporate structure here. Again, all of those things sound great, but easier said than done. And it seems like shareholders are interested in the idea, right? So we have a quote here from Alan Gould, who's a capital analyst, saying, quote, it is cleaner and simpler in that it does not require Paramount to pay up to buy an asset from the acquirer. However, it does not give the public the same opportunity to sell half their shares at an above-market price. Also, the Paramount board will have to decide which asset mix it prefers, with the Skydance offer slightly more weighted to content creation and which team it believes will be able to better run the ongoing company, end quote. Right? So there's this... It's very interesting. They're comparable in terms of the money, because I think Skydance is $8 billion, but even though it's technically more money, it's not necessarily more money because it involves this weird kind of stock thing. So it's, while being financially comparable, it really does give Paramount a fork in the road. Two different visions of how they want this company to go, right? So can Skydance prevail? Could they fended off Sony, right, of all people. They fended off a bunch of other suitors. It seemed like the deal was going to fall through, and then it ended up at the last second going through. And the Hollywood Reporter notes that, David Ellison being loaded and his father being loaded, Skydance has deep pockets to fight a bidding war. And again, while it's more complicated, the Skydance deal does have the value of actually providing a new creative direction for the company, whereas the Bronfman deal would essentially leave the company's current structure mostly intact. It would just have someone else owns National Amusements. Whereas the Skydance deal, it would merge Paramount and Skydance. You would have David Ellison, who himself is a creative producer in the industry. It really would be a new, for better or for worse, a new creative direction. The Bronfman deal would more or less be more of the same, short of the cost-cutting measures. Skydance is not happy about this. So lawyers from Skydance sent a letter to the special committee saying, quote, Paramount has committed an incurable material breach of the transaction agreement. While Skydance is not currently exercising its right to terminate the transaction agreement, we reserve the right to do so in the future, end quote. Yahoo Finance notes that this basically comes down to a technicality. Supposedly, Paramount did not notify Skydance in writing of the extension in the appropriate amount of time. Because again, the original agreement did allow for them to extend the negotiating window if a certain offer came around. But Skydance is basically trying to say, well, technically you didn't do it in time, so you can't explore this idea. Clearly, this is just Skydance lawyers trying to come up with a way to stall this, because this scares them shitless, as it should. But this thing in their letter saying, oh, like we're not going to exercise our right to terminate the agreement, but we have the right to do so. That's very much like you're really, that's a bluff. That's a bluff. On paper, Paramount needs this more, but Skydance wants it more, right? So for better or for worse, Paramount could be dumb and not maintain this relationship, even though it really needs it more than Skydance does. But David Ellison really wants to be the CEO of Paramount, of a merged Paramount Skydance. So in this letter claims the Bronfman deal is, quote, significantly less favorable to the Paramount stockholders from a financial point of view, end quote. Which is semi-true, because in the Bronfman deal, the Class A shareholders wouldn't be bought out at all. But again, on the flip side, the Class B shareholders would have a higher premium on their shares. So, I think right now, Skydance is throwing shit at the wall, seeing what sticks. Ultimately, this is one of the most chaotic M&A stories in Hollywood history. Again, it's been back and forth for months. Again, it finally got a deal. It seemed like everything was settled, and it all got thrown into turmoil again. And I have a quote here from Charles Elson, who's the founding director of the Weinberg Center for Corporate Governance at the University of Delaware. Say that 5 times fast. This guy is saying, quote, "This has been a very strange process. This company has provided more theater than any other company I can think of. It's just remarkable that we are here. It's just remarkable that here we are," end quote. Ultimately, Sherry Redstone has the final say, right? And this deal's interesting because it seems like she'll get the same payout no matter what, that $2.4 billion. Again, the big thing with Skydance versus something like Sony was always that the Skydance deal would keep the empire that her father built intact, whereas someone like Sony would kind of sell it for parts. Seems like Bronfman wouldn't be as aggressive as Sony would, but would at least be willing to sell those parts, right? And I think that gives Sherry Redstone pause, but again, does she want to face the shareholder revolt? And right now, she's kind of in a damned if she does, damned if she doesn't, because even if they don't go through with the deal, if they really explore this, it could damage the relationship with Skydance, right? Even if they end up merging, right? And I have a quote here from Melissa A. Schilling, who's a management professor at NYU's Stern School of Business, saying, quote, "It is creating conflict with Skydance, and should they prevail, they're going to come in angry. That's not a great way to start a marriage," end quote. So, this could end up being not good for Paramount, even if nothing changes from this deal and the Skydance thing just goes ahead as planned.